I'm Jude, I'm a queer man in my mid-30s, and in an attempt to remind myself that life really actually is worth living, I've bought a house in the middle of nowhere and moved to the Scottish countryside. I feel like I should make it clear that I am not raking leaves out of a desire to make the place look tidy. That ship sailed a long time ago. But because I want to bag them up and make leaf mould to use in my future vegetable garden. I am all about soil improvement, which is not a sentence I'd imagined myself saying 2 years ago. Oh, welcome back to my cottage homestead. It's a little bit of a different video this week. To celebrate hitting 25,000 subscribers, thank you to everyone who has followed along on my journey so far. I did not anticipate so many people being interested, especially not so early on in the project. I thought I would film a little Q&A video answering some of the questions that you asked on my last video and intersperse the answers with some of the smaller jobs that I need to get done around the house and the garden this week. I discovered this bed is full of herbs when I was weeding it the other day. It's very overgrown and needs a lot of work, but I thought I'd harvest some of the thyme to dry, as I use it a lot in bean stews. And although thyme is a perennial, a lot of this plant and others in this bed look dead. So I was planning on doing some of my question answering outside, but the Scottish weather had other ideas. It's pouring with rain outside, so instead I'm sitting on the floor on the landing in the cottage because that's the bit of the house that gets the best light. It's also the coldest bit of the house because there is almost no roof insulation. In fact, there might be no roof insulation at all. You can hear the rain hitting the roof really loudly up here, and the single glazed skylights don't help with added warmth either. So it's going to be a cold winter, and I'm going to have to move all of my plants that you can see behind me downstairs. They're up here because of the light. But they won't handle the cold very well, so they're going to be migrating downstairs for the winter, and I will put grow lights up so they don't die. Oh my goodness, the things I do for those. Thanks to everyone who left comments with questions on my last video. I'm going to answer a few and hopefully it will help you get to know me a little bit better. The first question is, when did you move to Scotland? Where are you from originally and where did you live before? I've been living in Scotland for 5 years. Before I bought the cottage, I was living in Cottage, which is a town in Fife, about 100 miles away from where I am now. As you can tell from my very southern accent, am not from Scotland originally. I am from South London, and before I moved up here, I was living in East Sussex on the Sussex coast in my parents' box room. Whereabouts in Scotland are you? I am in Aberdeenshire, which is the northeast of Scotland. It is not classed as the Highlands unless you are a delivery company wanting to charge extra to deliver here, which happens all the time. How did you find the cottage? I lived and breathed property websites. I was on Rightmove like it was my full-time job. I also spent a lot of time driving around Scotland. I drove hundreds of miles around the country trying to find somewhere I wanted to live and trying to find the right house. I viewed houses in Inverness, on the Isle of Skye, out on the west coast, a few different places in Aberdeenshire, which is where I ended up until I found this place. If you are looking for a rural property in Scotland, there's a couple of things to bear in mind. One, not all estate agents will list their properties on all of the property database websites. For example, when I was house hunting on the Isle of Skye, almost no properties on Skye will come up on Rightmove, but I think they were all on the market. And also, I actually found this property through a website called the ASPC, which is the Aberdeen Solicitor Property Centre. And solicitor property centres are quite common in Scotland. Most counties or areas will have one, and a lot of estate agents who don't put all of their properties up on the big databases like Zoopla and Rightmove and on the market will put them on these solicitor property centres. Some of them are a lot easier to browse than others. The Aberdeenshire one is pretty good, and I think the Highlands one is pretty good as well, but they are definitely worth looking at if you're looking for a property and you're struggling to find something that kind of fits your parameters. Does the cottage have a name? It does have a name, but the name will take you straight to my exact address on Google, which for obvious reasons is something that I want to avoid. So I'm open to nicknames if anyone has any suggestions. Lots of people wanted to know what the local community is like and whether I have friends in the area or if I get lonely. And I said to a friend on the phone the other night that I feel like I'm more part of a community here after 6 weeks than I was after nearly 5 years where I lived before. And I don't know if that is common with rural communities or whether I just lucked out with the neighbours I have and the community that I've moved into. One of my neighbours came and introduced herself, I think 2 or 3 days after I'd moved in. She brought a neighbourhood newsletter and a card with her phone number. She was absolutely lovely and introduced me to lots more people in the local area. And I've been to artists' open studios with a neighbour. I've been on hikes. I've picked plums. One of the local beekeepers gave me some of his honey. And I also went to a community pub night last week, which is very out of character for me. I am a massive introvert and I thrive in my own company. So I'm pretty good living on my own and I've been doing it for quite a while. I didn't know anyone in the area when I moved here, but also when I moved to Scotland, I only knew one person living in Scotland. And although she is a very dear friend of mine, she didn't live anywhere near me when I was living in Fife, and she lives even further away now. I do get lonely occasionally in that way that you do when you're single in your 30s and all of your friends live pretty far away and are busy with their own families and their partners and their lives. But most of the time, I'm absolutely fine. Several people asked for the story behind the rings that I wear, and I wish I had a fun story to share with you, but I don't. A couple of people asked if they were my parents' wedding rings, and that's such a lovely thought. I wish they were. My dad didn't wear a ring, and my mum did. She wore a plain gold band that she inherited from her mum that I still have and I might wear at some point, but I don't really wear gold jewellery, so at the moment it's in a little box to keep it safe. A fun fact. Despite being together for over 35 years, my parents only got married in December 2018. They had a really small ceremony. It was just me and two other witnesses who were long-term friends of theirs. And we went for lunch in a restaurant afterwards. And that was it. They got married for tax reasons, and I would love to say the romance is alive and well, but they are both dead now, so sadly it's not. As for the rings that I wear, I made them myself at a silversmithing workshop that I went to earlier in the year. I was having a kind of period of time where I was feeling quite flat. I was waiting to move. I hadn't found a house yet. I was just like ticking off days while I was house hunting and searching for somewhere to live. And I'd always wanted to try silversmithing. I found this workshop in St Andrews and decided that just because I didn't have anyone to do it with didn't mean that I couldn't just go along and enjoy myself. So that's what I did. I made these rings and I made a necklace for a good friend of mine. Had a great time. Definitely recommend it. I also went away and bought a box full of silversmithing jewellery tools on Facebook Marketplace that I haven't touched since. Maybe this winter. We'll see. I'd been saving this next project for a literal rainy day, and in Scotland, one of those is never too far away. I hate the shower curtain touching me in the shower. In an ideal world, I'd replace it with a glass shower screen, or maybe a bath I can actually lie down in, but this part of the building is going to be knocked down when I renovate, and it seems like an unnecessary expense for a temporary measure. $19.99 for a curved shower curtain rail though, that's definitely almost the same thing. It's up. It's not the right way up, but it's up. Well, that's a satisfying realization. I can turn it so it faces inwards. I can't turn it so it faces outwards. So I have to take it off. Put it back on again. Which means I don't care anymore. I just want it to be over. On the plus side, by the time I finish this, I would have worked up so much of a sweat. I'll need to have a shower and I can test it out. Something has gone correct. Supposed to go this way up. You can't be beaten at the literal last hurdle. It's a shower curtain. This whole project might have been a complete fiasco, but it is worth it to be able to shower without turning sideways. 100% recommend. The second most popular question after how much did you pay for the cottage is what do you do for a living? And until March of this year, I ran a yarn company. I dyed yarn for the knitting and textile industries. It's something I'd been doing for over 8 years, and for the most part I loved it, but the last 18 months or so were pretty difficult and I hit burnout in a big way. And at the beginning of this year I sat down and I worked out that if I was careful I could afford to do what I'm calling is Jude's gap year, where I could budget and live off my savings for a year while I worked out what I wanted to do next. And I knew I wanted to do some big life changes, like selling my house, moving, etc. So that's what I did. I took Jude's gap year. I am just over halfway through it at the moment. I still don't really have any plans on what I'm doing, but I feel a lot happier. So that's halfway there, I think. I have worked for myself for an incredibly long time, and before that, I worked entry-level retail jobs. So on paper, I am not really qualified to do anything. I have a lot of skills, but they're not on my CV. So if anyone is in the market for a clueless but sort of charismatic handyman, then let me know. Although, that being said, this YouTube channel is monetized now, so technically I'm a professional YouTuber, but very, very technically. Quite a few people watching have followed me and my yarn company across social media for the last few years and asked whether I would go back to dyeing yarn. And never say never, but it is not in my plan at the moment. I did keep a little bit of the equipment that I used. I boxed it up and it is in one of the many sheds here. But I have no real intention to go back to it. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, but it probably won't be in the yarn and the knitting industry. Several people asked, where did you learn your DIY skills and did your parents teach you? Firstly, I'm impressed that you think I have DIY skills. I must be doing a better job editing these videos than I thought. And secondly, I wish my mum could hear people thinking that my dad taught me DIY skills. My dad, bless him, neither of my parents were particularly handy. My dad was a mechanic, and it used to take him an entire afternoon plus help from me and my mum to put up a shelf. He had a lot of tools and he did basic home maintenance, but he wasn't a DIYer. He didn't really build anything. It wasn't his cup of tea. So I learned most of the very limited skills that I have. They're very rudimentary entry-level skills just from picking up tools and trying to figure things out. I would occasionally watch videos on YouTube about how something specifically worked, but it was unusual. When I bought my first house, it was 500 miles away from my parents, and I didn't know anyone to ask for help with projects. So I took myself to B&Q, I bought a little combi drill, and I set about installing these wire pull-out drawer baskets in my kitchen cupboards to kind of increase my storage space, and I went from there. I was lucky to have a couple of neighbours where I was living before who were really handy, and they helped me do things like lay a new lawn and install some floor-to-ceiling built-in bookcases. But otherwise, I just decided I wanted to do something and then kind of worked backwards from the end result through the steps of how I needed to get there. And most of the time, as I'm sure you can tell, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm probably not doing it right. But the more you do things, the more you learn and the better you get at them. And with DIY, it's something I'm having to adjust. It's something that I'm definitely not good at straight away. So I'm having to kind of work through that process and get to a point where I'm learning and getting better. But definitely not an expert. I do get really inspired by watching people on YouTube and on social media who just go out and tackle projects. And I'm kind of like, well, if they can do it and they have no formal experience, then I can probably give it a go too. And I'm sure if you are a person with trades skills, you cringe watching me do most things. And if I could go back and do an apprenticeship instead of go to art school, then I probably would. But until then, I'm just gonna keep going.
When you live somewhere it rains a lot, when it's not raining, you try to make the most of it. In this case, by going outside and planting some micro clover seed, because this is what counts for fun in your 30s.
Do you have a project you're most excited about? Okay, long term, it's probably putting solar panels on the house, but that is a way away in the future because I'm pretty certain that I need a new roof on the cottage, and the roof on the barn is going to be taken off completely and redone. So I am not in a position for solar panels quite yet. Also, I would really like to have a bath that I can lie down in and also not have to fill up with kettles full of boiling water. In the short term, it's probably working on my bedroom and making it a little bit cozier, and that is a job that I'm hoping to start work on next week. Do you have any plans to run an Airbnb short term rental type thing on your property? So, I would love to have a little cabin for friends to stay in when they visit. In the very, very distant future, when I run out of house projects and I've maybe converted a camper van to go and travel Scotland around in with my future dog. I am planning on building a little guest cabin with a little kitchenette and a bathroom so that my friends have somewhere kind of self contained that they can stay in when they visit. And it would be nice to be able to rent that out to members of the public to stay in, but I would have to get the necessary planning permission to do that, and I'm not sure I would be granted that based on the feudal deeds for the property. Also, the area isn't particularly touristy, so I don't know if that many people would be interested in visiting the area. It's lovely, but there's not really any tourist attractions here. So I don't know, but I do like the idea of building a cabin. So we'll see. Do you have plans for animals? Lots of people have suggested that I get a dog or a cat to keep me company, and getting a dog has been something I've wanted to do for the last 18 months or so, but an assortment of things have just been getting in the way. I have to travel for a friend's wedding next month, and I currently don't have anyone who could look after pets while I'm traveling, so after that, I might start looking into getting a dog. And cats and chickens are also on my list, but probably not until the new year, especially chickens, because I need to build somewhere secure and safe from predators for them to live. I have a shed that I've earmarked for a potential chicken coop, although all of my neighbours who've kept chickens previously have kept them in coops that are raised up on stilts to stop the badgers getting in, because apparently badgers are the number one chicken predator in the area. So I also want to build an enclosed run to kind of keep them safe. So there's a big DIY project between me and the chickens. Someone else asked if I had plans for a particular breed of chicken, and I don't know how it works in other countries, but in the UK we have an assortment of charities who rescue chickens from battery farms that are like their mass barn raised sort of egg factories, really, that don't treat chickens very well at all. They rescue them and rehome them to people, and they usually don't have many feathers, and they get to live out their best like chicken lives, living outside, growing back all their feathers, and that is something that I am planning to do. I don't have a need for a ridiculously large amount of eggs. I am just one person who doesn't really eat that many eggs. But I'd probably eat more if I, had a regular source of fresh eggs. I just like the idea of having them. So there are definitely going to be chickens, and I will try and rescue them if I can. There's a charity, I think, about half an hour away from me that does them. So when I have built my chicken infrastructure, I am going to be looking into that. Who edits your videos, and do you have any videography experience? I've had some lovely feedback about the videography on this channel, so thank you very much. I have no videography experience at all. I did run a YouTube channel as a sort of sideline to my yarn company, but it was very much a sit down and talk to the camera style channel, which is similar to what I'm doing as I'm sitting and filming this. And it didn't really have that creative outlet for videography that I am really, really enjoying with this. So no formal training at all, and I edit all of my own videos on Final Cut Pro. Nothing fancy. I'm hoping to sit down and teach myself DaVinci Resolve maybe over winter when I have slightly less to do DIY-wise.
A few people have asked if I'm planning on starting a Patreon or a YouTube membership. I might in the future when I've worked out what additional content I can commit to. I have put together an Amazon wishlist after a handful of people told me to. I'll link it in the description if you're interested. If not, that's totally fine. They're all things I'll get around to buying eventually.
Now for the question that I've been asked ever since I put up my first video, and that is, how much did you pay for the cottage? So the cottage went on the market valued at £220,000, and I viewed it 3 days after it had been on the market. And I think at that point it already had 4 notes of interest. And when a property gets quite a lot of interest in Scotland, it goes to a closing date, which means that you put together your best offer and your solicitor submits it on your behalf, and everybody has to get their offers in by that closing date, and then the sellers will look at all of the offers and pick which one they like the best. And that is usually based on the amount of money, but also based on the position of the buyer, whether they have to sell their house, whether they're a cash buyer, etc., etc. And so I did that. I put my offer in on the Friday, and the closing date was the Monday. I was really lucky to be going to see Taylor Swift and the Eras tour on the Saturday, because it completely distracted me from all of the moving stress. And I got a call from my solicitor on the Monday to say that the sellers had accepted my offer, and I paid £250,000 for the cottage, which is £30,000 more than the original asking price. And I think in US dollars at the time of recording, it's maybe 334,000 US dollars. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that, which is all that matters. It was within my budget, and I'd be interested to hear whether you would have paid that for it, or you think I'm ridiculous for spending £250,000 on a house with almost no insulation. That needs a lot of work doing to it, but it's going to keep me busy, and I'm enjoying it so far. No regrets yet. How are you funding your homestead? You mentioned inheriting money from your parents, but you've also talked about homesteading on a budget. Okay, so a disclaimer, my parents weren't wealthy, they didn't have pensions, they didn't have a plan on how they were going to fund their retirement, and they were both still working when they died. But they did own their own house in the southeast of England, which is a part of the country where property prices are high. Inheriting money from my parents meant that I didn't have to use the equity that I had in my house in Fife to buy the cottage, which I could have done without that money. I spent about £10,000 more than the sale price of my house in Fife on the cottage, but it would have meant that I wouldn't have been able to stop working for a year, and I wouldn't have had that money set aside to renovate the house, which is what I'm planning on doing with the equity from the sale of my last house. If my parents hadn't died, I probably wouldn't have moved when I did. The plan was always to move more rurally, but I wouldn't have hit the same level of burnout at the same time as having a life is really short realization that eventually led me to moving here. And in case there is any doubt, I would rather have my parents than any money I might have inherited from them. My mum cooked an excellent Sunday roast dinner, and I miss them. As for homesteading on a budget, my savings are a finite amount of money, and unless I dig up treasure on the property, which isn't looking very likely, so far all I've dug up are rocks and underpants, then I need to be pretty careful about what I am spending. And I'm trying to talk myself out of buying a drone with my YouTube AdSense revenue money, because that's supposed to be paying a couple of bills and not funding my desire to shoot artful video footage of the Scottish countryside. Also, I'd rather spend less so that I can work less. And yes, I would like fancy things like a drone and a pickup truck and some slightly fancier power tools, but I would rather have more time to work on my projects and things that I find meaningful and bring me joy, rather than having a bit more money to buy things to make myself feel better for doing a job that makes me miserable, if that makes any sense. I'm in no way saying that anyone could afford to do what I'm doing if they just stopped buying things. I live alone, I don't have children or dependents, and I was lucky enough to live a pretty frugal life and have a job where I could save for a rainy day. And then all of my rainy days came at once, and that led me here.
As always, thanks for watching. I really appreciate you joining me on this journey. See you next weekend.